Thank you, Orly, and thanks to your team, all of you who have brought us all together tonight. It's so good to see you, the NIF community, here in the room and on screen, wherever you might be, during such dark and difficult days, because as you well know, even by our NIF standards, these are particularly tough and trying times. Yesterday was a terrifying and stark reminder that when it comes to our beloved Israel and the Middle East, we are in the midst of a slow-moving earthquake. The ground beneath our feet is shifting, and we don't yet know what the landscape will look like when the quaking and the shaking finally stop. The only certainty of these times, as our former board chair Talia Sasson likes to say, is of course uncertainty. But you have all heard me say this before, and I will say it again now. These are also the times that NIF was built for. Over the past difficult months, I've thought a lot about the words of wisdom from two great rabbis whose writings always shine a light in the darkness for me and serve as a source of inspiration. The first, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, wrote that his definition of a truly religious person was one, quote, who suffers harm done to others, whose greatest passion is compassion, and whose greatest strength is love and the defiance of despair. And we all at NIF know that despair is a luxury that we simply cannot afford. The second is that great rabbinic sage, Mr. Fred Rogers, who said, quote, when I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. And so, throughout the challenges of the past year and a half, I have looked for the helpers. And so often, the helpers have been the activists and the organizations and the supporters of the New Israel Fund community. It's hard for us sometimes to remember now, but last year, 2023, was actually a year of double crisis for Israel and those of us who care so much about it. The first of these crises was the attempt by the ferociously right-wing government of Benjamin Netanyahu and his extremist political allies to launch what the Israeli press called a judicial coup, a wholesale attempt to strip the Supreme Court of the State of Israel of its power of judicial review and its independence, and to fundamentally weaken and rework Israeli democracy, to turn Israel into the next Hungary or Turkey, the next former democracy. And while that was a moment of terrible concern for many of those worried about Israel's character and indeed its future, it was for NIF also a heady moment. And that's because we were not taken by surprise by the attack on democracy. Hell, we had been warning about the attack on democracy for over 10 years. And we didn't just warn, we built. We built a new civil society infrastructure of organizations and institutions designed to protect Israel's liberal democracy. And when the attack on that democracy began in earnest in January of last year, we were there and we were ready. NIF-funded NGOs organized some of the very first protests against the judicial coup, and just look what happened after that. I sometimes say that we tend to define success at NIF when an issue that we have pioneered becomes accepted by the mainstream. So, for example, when NIF founded and funded Israel's first rape crisis centers, its first LGBTQ open houses, its first religious pluralism organizations, these things were considered controversial, way beyond the mainstream. Of course, today, they are not only accepted by millions and millions of Israelis, they are points of pride for Israelis and their supporters around the world. Well, that's exactly what happened with the mass protest movement that took to the streets early last year. The seeds that NIF had planted blossomed into a massive movement, and hundreds of thousands of Israelis took to the streets to save their democracy. And then, of course, came October 7th. You've just heard Orly describe some of NIF's responses to that terrible day. In addition to providing humanitarian relief to those most affected by the attacks, NIF's Emergency Safety Net program ensured that tensions between Israeli citizens, Arab and Jewish alike, did not spill over into violence the way they did a few years ago, the last time Israel and Hamas fought in May of 2021. And we provided support to enable Israel's civil rights organizations to defend freedom of expression of Israelis at a time when the government was cracking down on those expressing compassion for people suffering in Gaza or protesting the war. And of course, as always, we supported those human rights organizations shining a light on what was happening in the West Bank under the cover of the fog of war as extremist settlers, with tacit approval from some of Israel's ultra-right-wing leaders, terrified Palestinian villagers into fleeing their homes. Now, these are not always popular things to do in Israel today, where in some ways it is still October 7th. Israelis remain traumatized, and a government set on dismantling liberal democracy in Israel and stoking divides between Israelis remains in power. But we are not out to win a popularity contest. Everything we do is in service of our vision of a democratic Israel living at peace with its neighbors, but also itself, an Israel that reflects the best of its founding and our deepest values. And that is why we are undertaking a campaign to support trusted, internationally renowned aid organizations in their efforts to get food and humanitarian relief to civilians suffering in Gaza as a result of this war. This also was not an obvious or easy thing for an organization like NIF to go out and do, but the conversation that we had with our board as we planned it was one of the easiest I can remember, because this is an extension of our deepest values. I hope you'll consider also supporting that effort. You can just click on the website, in addition to the incredible support for our continuing core work that we're here to celebrate tonight. This effort is dear to a lot of our hearts, and sort of poignantly, no one more so than some of our top Israeli staff leaders, who actually called me and came to me with this idea that we had to do something for people suffering in Gaza. Here is what one of them, my dear friend and our associate director in Israel, Shira Ben Sasson, had to say about this campaign. Quote, "This is not just our moral obligation, but our Jewish and halachic responsibility. And our hostages are also relying on this food to reach Gaza, including a hostage who is very dear to me. Both of my grandmothers, one in Hebron and one during the Holocaust, were saved by people from another nation who risked their lives in saving my grandmother's lives. For me, this is personal. I feel obligated to try to save the lives of my neighbors." Shira, an Orthodox Jewish woman with kids currently serving in the IDF, who is also the spokesperson for a family with a son held hostage in Gaza, is one of those helpers Mr. Rogers was talking about. Shira gives me courage, and she gives me hope. And so too do our Israeli speakers tonight. The mighty champion of shared society and democracy, Shir Natsatsky, and my dear friend and NIF board member, the heroic Yasmin Abu Frecha. And so too do all of you, the engine of the work that we do on the ground every day. And I would be remiss if I didn't add that here in this place on this day, when so many of us were worried that we wouldn't even be able to be here just yesterday, I look out and see Sandy and Linda Galanter, who brought together, who did the shidduch between NIF and the JCC, and who have diligently, quietly supported not only our organizations in all the normal ways, but they have ensured that over the last years, not only JCC staffers, but also NIF staffers outside of Israel have the opportunity to travel to see what's happening on the ground for themselves in person. So thank you both for that. Also, I can't not mention Rita Semmel, whose being here, whose life, whose way in the world serves as a shining inspiration and example for me of how you live your life in this world. So Rita, I'm so moved that you're here. It would not be the guardian of democracy without you. So hope, the kind of hope that you all give me, is something that we desperately need right now. But here we're in luck, because creating reasons for hope is what NIF does best. Now, some of you know I wrote a book a few years ago in which I tried to provide an NIF-y approach to Israel, Israeli history, the conflict with its neighbors, the conflict with the Palestinians. And my favorite criticism of the book came in an otherwise positive review in the Sunday New York Times Book Review. Mom, if you're watching, I know you're still proud about that. The reviewer wrote that while the book was good, at the end of the day, the author didn't provide a solution, only reasons for hope. Well, guilty as charged, and proudly so, because everything that we will see and hear tonight, the people that we will meet and honor and celebrate, the programs and the projects that we're all here to support, all of them are reasons to hope. And while hope in and of itself is not a playbook for social change or conflict resolution, it is a necessary ingredient of both. And the world has never needed the reasons for hope that the New Israel Fund provides more than it does today, right now. I want to end with the words of a favorite Jewish son of San Francisco, Harvey Milk, the first openly gay elected official in American history. Milk was assassinated because of his identity and also because of his vision for a better, fairer society for everyone. Here's what Harvey, speaking about the disenfranchised, the marginalized, the powerless, had to say about hope. The only thing they have to look forward to is hope. And you have to give them hope. Hope for a better world. Hope for a better tomorrow. Hope that all will be all right. Without hope, not only gays, but black people, seniors, the handicapped, the us's will give up. And you have to give people hope. Amen, Rabbi Harvey. We have to give people hope. And that is what we, the New Israel Fund community, will continue to do today, tomorrow, no matter what. Thank you all for being reasons for hope here tonight.